My name is Asha Creary, and I am a licensed professional counselor supervisor in the state of Texas and in Missouri. I operate a small private practice in Central Texas, and I thoroughly enjoy teaching. I currently hold a National Counselor Certification, a Texas Educator Certificate, and Registered Play Therapy distinction. Welcome to another episode of Post Grad with Asha, NCE edition. This video will be the start of me discussing theories and key stakeholders in the development of psychology with a hint of sample questions at the very end. We'll start with Sigmund Freud in this video. Fun fact, Freud experienced significant pain while alive and had his doctor administer a lethal dose of morphine to help him relieve the pain. It is written out that he committed suicide. So who is Freud? Freud was the founding father of psychoanalysis, and he was a psychologist, a physician, and he was well ahead of his time. He is said to be the father of psychology. All right, so let's go into the different types of theories that he came up with or developmental stages that he developed throughout his time. So there was a developmental stage or theory called psychosexual stages. So Freud believed that we as human beings grew in a sexual way. It'll make more sense when we get through the stages. Now, it was very controversial, and a lot of people actually did not like Freud because of his beliefs in regard to sex, children, and their attraction to their parents. So the psychosexual stages is broken down into 5 different stages. The first stage is oral, so from 0 to 12 months, which includes mouth, sucking, chewing, and biting. So when you think about babies, what do babies do? They grab at food, they want to put everything in their mouth. Mostly we say because they're teething, but kids just want to try stuff. That's their only source of intake or sensory information outside of them expressing that they're sad or angry or wet through crying. So most times, when you think of oral, think babies. Think babies are always putting things in their mouth. Next up is going to be the anal stage. So that's from about age 1 to 3. This is bowel, bladder, or elimination. So what do toddlers do? Toddlers run around the house taking their diaper off. They run around saying, "Change me." They run around playing in wet diapers. They go and poop in the corner. That is what kids between the ages of 1 and 3 do. So one thing for you to help you remember that the anal stage is between 1 and 3, think toddlers. Toddlers play and poop. The phallic stage is the pleasure zone, which is coping with incestual feelings or the Oedipus complex or Electra complex together, Oedipus versus Electra complex. So the Oedipus complex / Electra complex is pretty much the attachment of a child to the parent of the opposite sex. So phallic, let's take a step back. So with the phallic stage, think pleasure. What makes 3 to 6-year-olds happy? What keeps them from crying? And what are 3 to 6-year-olds typically doing? They're trying to find things that make them feel good. So with the Oedipus complex or the Electra complex, think of those videos that you see on Instagram or on YouTube where the daughter is like fighting the mom off from the dad and telling mom, "You can't kiss daddy, you cannot kiss mommy, you're mine," right? Or think about the little boys that are fighting with their dads about touching their moms. Like, "Don't touch my mommy, don't do that." And we see these videos and we laugh about them, but this is pretty much what the Oedipus and Electra complex is. This is what that looks like. So although people didn't really align with this ideal, it pretty much shows up everywhere for a lot of us. On social media, it shows up with us in our lives if we've had children. So think phallic, think those 3 to 6-year-olds fighting off the opposite sex. And then also think incestual feelings or attraction. I think that's more of the part that people probably didn't necessarily agree with, was more of the incestual feelings or incestuous feelings. But in reality, it's just, this is my mommy or this is my daddy, don't touch them, is what we would like to say is happening. All right, latent stage or latent stage. This is between the ages of 7 to 11. These are dormant sexual feelings, and this is where gender identity starts to form. So between the ages of 7 to 11 is typically where you'll start to see kids develop into who they are going to identify as. This is also typically where, if you're in a Black family, right, you start to hear those comments around like, oh, they're going to be a little this way. That's typically where that starts to show up, between the ages of 7 and 11. So if you think about, you know, how the LGBTQ plus population or the conversations around it showed up in your family, again, if you're Black specifically, that's where these conversations start to come up. And that's where the family starts to identify like, oh, this is what's happening. Same with other communities, but that's just me including like a cultural component to kind of help you remember that specifically. So latent stages, think gender identity. LGI, latent gender identity. Okay. Next up is genital or genital stage. This is where a kid reaches puberty and onwards. Now, there are some children that reach puberty at the age of 9, at the age of 10. Typically, your girls are reaching puberty around that age. And so this is where the kids or the person start to identify who they are, and they start to solidify that. So with the latent stage, it's typically like, this is who I am. And then they start to think, oh, okay, well, I'm attracted to this person. I think I feel different, you know, down in the intimate areas. But when you hit the genital stage, people are more convicted in what they want and what they're looking for and what they're exploring. So think 12 and up, genital. That is typically what life is about in adulthood. Now, between the ages of 12 or 18, we would hope that they would not be doing those things, but it is what it is. All right, so how can you actually remember these stages? So there's one that's inappropriate that I came across on a Reddit post, and then there's another one that's a little bit more user-friendly. So to help you remember the order of the stages, I'm going to say the words all the way out loud. So old ass people love grapefruit. That's what that means. So oral, anal, phallic, latent, genital. Old, oral, ass, anal, exactly what it is, right? People or phallic, love, latent, grapefruit, genital. Old age prisoners love grapes, same concept. Old, oral, age, anal, prisoners, phallic, L, latent, love, and genital, grapes, which makes sense. Grapes are round. All right, so what is psychoanalysis? So Freud believed that people, as mentioned in the previous slide, people could be cured by making conscious their unconscious thoughts and motivations. And he believed that, or this treatment specifically focused on repressed conflict and to help the client deal with it. The therapist typically functions to allow the client to transfer their unconscious feeling that they may have been directed towards someone else onto the therapist. So in psychoanalysis, you may hear the words transference and countertransference pop up in regard to the role of the counselor, but that's not necessarily to say that those things are healthy per se, because we're taught in our code of ethics, do not engage in transference and countertransference as a clinician. But specifically thinking about psychoanalysis, think transfer. We're going to transfer this information or these thoughts, these feelings, these emotions onto the therapist. And the therapist's role is to allow that to happen and to be the person on the other side. All right. So Freud also introduced the id, ego, and the superego. So as we get into the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between the three and how they show up in the layers of consciousness as we talk about them. So the id focuses on the pleasure principle. So when you think about id, pleasure principle, it starts at birth, it's biological and it's instinctual, it demands instant gratification, it's not rational, it's not logical, and it has no concept of time, and it's typically in your unconscious mind. So when you sit back and you think, what makes a person do what they do? Did they think about what they did? No, they're operating in the id. It's unconscious, it's not logical, it's not rational. It is their instinctual or their biological initial response to whatever the situation is at hand. And it pleases instant gratification, or it pleases the need to be gratified. So id, pleasure, birth, biological, instinctual, immediate gratification, not rational, unconscious mind. So think the most dormant layer and think trauma responses. So when you think id, think of a trauma response and how do people typically operate when they're in trauma? It's irrational, it's not logical, it's unconscious. They probably are not even aware that it's happening, and they're doing anything that they can to relieve the pain or release or receive instant gratification based on what they're feeling. Okay. Now, hopefully that makes sense, and don't think too much about it. Just use that as a way to help you remember what that looks like and how that can show up for a client, and to help you remember it if the word shows up on the exam. So with the id, think survival. Again, think trauma responses, survival. Okay. All right, let's get into the ego. So the ego is a mixture of both the subconscious and the conscious. So this is where you're almost awake, right? This is where you're almost to a point of awareness. This is an operation of, or operates off the reality principle. So ego looks at what's actually happened in front of me, and it's logical, it's planned, it includes the preconscious and the conscious, or, the subconscious, like we're up, we're aware, we're at the here and now, we know what's happening. And it is pressed by the id to give into pleasure or instant gratification, regardless of the consequences. So when you think ego, think ecological or egological, right? Ego is logic. It's operating in reality. It knows what's happening. It's aware. It's conscious. It's thinking about the subconscious, unconscious, the preconscious, and conscious mind. And we'll get into those a little bit later. I think, yes, in the next set of slides, we'll get into preconscious and conscious. So think logic, ego-logical, right? Reality, it's psychological. You know what's going on. You're aware, and it fights against pretty much the id. All right, superego. So the superego operates off of social settings. So think SS, superego, socially superego, whatever you want, however you want to connect those two. But think superego, social SS. All right, so the superego operates on social interactions, morality principle. What is said to be moral based on the entire social diagram or diaphragm of society, right? It is conscious, and it's conscious, and it operates on the ego ideals, okay? So it pursues perfectionism. It focuses on guilt, morals, and standards, morality principle. So what do you do when you're out in public? You're operating in superego. You focus on guilt, morals, standards, beliefs based on the community that you live in or the social setting that you're in. So when you see superego, think morals, think social, SS, social, superego. All right, unconscious mind. So, with the unconscious mind, Freud was also known for his ideas around the unconscious mind in which individuals are aware or not aware of the impact it has on them. So, the conscious is going to be your known impulses, events, memories, and present knowledge. So, here and now, think here and now, present. Okay. Think five senses. I know what's going on around me. I can feel, I can touch, I can smell, I can see. I am here and now. The preconscious is easily recalled but not known memories and drives. So, what the preconscious typically looks like is, you ever think about a word that's like right at the tip of your tongue, but you just can't get it to come out? Or if you can remember a song, but you can't really get it out, that's pretty much what the preconscious looks like or would be described as for most people. Unconscious. So unconscious includes emotions, thoughts, memories, drives, influencing behaviors without current awareness or hidden, forgotten experiences. So unconscious, think, again, trauma responses, think lack of awareness, think I don't know what's really going on, or think asleep, deep REM. Somebody is deep in their sleep, they're unconscious, they are sedated, whatever you want to think about to help you remember unconscious, think I'm not aware of what's happening around me. All right. So Freud also came up with 16 defense mechanisms. So on the exam, these will show up. So I encourage you to write these words down or find like a PDF version of the 16 defense coping mechanisms described by Freud in relation to psychoanalysis. So the first one is displacement. It is directing emotions onto something other than what caused the arousal. Rationalization is justifying behavior to oneself and others with well thought. Compensation is attempting to overcome anxiety associated with inferiority. Projection is attributing another person's feelings and ideas that are acceptable so that the other person seems to have these feelings and ideas. Reaction formation is exaggeration and openly displaying a trait that is opposite of the repressed traits or tendencies. Denial is failing to acknowledge or deal with reality. That's everybody's favorite word. You're in denial. Repression is unconsciously blocking urges or desires or traumatic experiences. It is typically the most basic self-defense, repression, okay? Identification. That is attempts at overcoming inferiority so the person takes on the characteristics of someone more important than self. Substitution is achieving alternate goals or gratification to mask frustration and anxiety. Fantasy is retreating one's mind to a comfortable setting. It's the most useful defense mechanism. So fantasy would probably be described as similarly to finding a calm space when it comes to EMDR, or thinking of a safe place when it comes to grounding or guided imagery. That's what typically what fantasy could be described as. Regression is reverting to a pattern of thoughts, behaviors, or feelings appropriate to an earlier stage of development. Sublimation is redirecting unacceptable impulses in socially and culturally accepted channels. Introjection is taking on values or beliefs of another person. Undoing is acting inappropriately, leading to anxiety, and then they act in the reverse of the behavior to reverse the previous behavior. So think, I ran over somebody. Then think, I'm going to reverse it and act like I didn't hit that person. And then I'm going to go around them and act like I didn't hit them. Undoing. All right. Emotional insulation. It is protecting oneself from hurt by reverting to passivity. Isolation is separating the emotion from the experience. All right, so we're going to jump into about 3 to 4 different other terms or ideals that you need to be aware of when it comes to Freud. So incest, totem and taboo, dread incest, born not learned, socially passed down. So what this means is Freud believed that people are born into incestual families or dynamics and that it is passed down. So what that means is he believed that people who experienced incest within their family was something that was taught to them within the family dynamics. And most people will agree with that. So if you think incest, think totem and taboo. I think that's like a manuscript that he wrote in regard to this ideal of dread incest. All right, wish fulfillment. So a dream can be a wish fulfillment. I wish these things would happen to me, and then later on that night, you have a dream about it and it happens, or it doesn't happen. Freud also believed that a slip of a tongue is a wishful fulfillment. So when you're out and about and you're talking to friends and you actually accidentally say out loud, I wish you would just be quiet. You really do wish they would be quiet. You might say, I didn't mean to say that. No, you did. And that was a true wish fulfillment, right? That's a Freudian slip. You didn't realize you said it out loud. All right, maturation theory. So this is the belief that developmental order or unfolding behavior is due to heredity. Stimuli must be present for the behavior to emerge, and predetermined neural development must be present for the next behavior to emerge. So what this means is Freud believed that our behaviors are hereditary, which we may later have learned that is true because we talk about epigenetics and how trauma is passed down through generations and so to speak, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. He believed that it is hereditary, meaning it is in our genetics, it is in our genes, and it is within us. It has been born into us. He shared, in order for it to present itself, a stimuli must occur. So I'm Black, so I'm going to use a Black example. There's this thing that all Black people do. I mean, I don't believe that it's something we've learned. I think it's just something we do. So imagine somebody sneezing pre-COVID. Everybody Black would do something like, not because we're taught that face. Nobody's taught that face. It just emerges It emerges because the stimuli is present and we don't know where we got the face. It just happens, right? It happens like clockwork. And so in order for that face to come out, the sneeze has to occur. It is a real thing. All of us do it. We all do it. Don't be watching us. All right. So he also believed in order for the next behavior or a new behavior to emerge or the next behavior to emerge, the neural developmental or the neural pathways must be present or closed or synapse in order for the behavior to occur. So what that means is I can't run if my neural pathways aren't developed enough for me to be able to run. And I'm not going to get into sensory motor skills. That's not where I'm going with that. So don't think that. Just think neural development. Has this person fully developed in this area in order for the next behavior to emerge? All right, so we're going to get into the sample questions. So specifically for these sample questions, one thing I want you guys to remember is think Freud, think psychosexual, think subconscious, unconscious, preconscious, think id, ego, superego, think psychosexual, well, I said psychosexual stages, but think oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital stages. And think, what is the role of the counselor and why is psychoanalysis important? So remember, the role of the counselor is to allow that client to transfer those feelings, those thoughts, those emotions onto the counselor. The other thing, when it comes to why is psychoanalysis, what's the primary purpose of psychoanalysis? It is to make sure that you help the client bring their subconscious memories or moments, thoughts, behaviors, or feelings to their conscious levels, subconscious to conscious, making aware of things that they've experienced. So let's get into this first question. A client begins engaging in negative self-talk while in a session. The client then continues to say, I am a bad person, so that is why it is okay for my friends to not check on me. I should have kept saying yes, and maybe they would not treat me so bad. This is an example of what? All right, if you said rationalization, you guessed it. So rationalization is trying to make sense of. Now, if you are struggling with trying to remember rationalization, think grief cycle and think, what's the word on the grief cycle? I don't know why my mind just went blank like that. When you're on I'm looking it up real quick. When you're thinking of the grief cycle, there's shock, there's anger, there's sadness, there is, oh my God, what is the word? I got every order but that word. Then there's acceptance after that. Bargaining. Kinda. Think bargaining. So with bargaining, it's trying to rationalize ways to bring this person back. So it kind of connects with the word rationalization because you're trying to rationalize why these things are happening to you. And so you think of all the ways you can make it not be this way. Or you're coming up with all these ways to accept what has happened to you, whether it's fair or not. All right. Freud is most known for which of the following theories or ideas? All right. If you said unconscious mind, you're absolutely right. Remember, I told you, think unconscious, preconscious, conscious. Archetypes was Carl Jung. Birth order is Alfred Adler. Identity crisis is Erikson. Okay. Which we'll later learn about those theorists later. I can't remember who's going to be in the next video, but we'll go into those later. The primary goal of psychoanalytic therapy is to do what? Give you 10 seconds. All right, so if you said bring the repressed conflict to the conscious, you are absolutely right. Remember, I don't want to suppress the unconscious mind as a psychoanalytic clinician. I don't want to do that. I want to bring it to the forefront. Retreating one's mind to a comfortable setting. That is a defense mechanism that would possibly be used by a client, not necessarily the goal of therapy. So it is considered to be one of Freud's 16 defense mechanisms that we went over in the previous slide. Retreating one's mind to a comfortable setting is fantasy. That is what that defense mechanism is. So if you know the words, if you know the vocabulary terms, it will be easy. Understanding transference. No, that is absolutely wrong. The primary goal of the role of a clinician is to allow the client to transfer their true thoughts, feelings, and desires onto the clinician about a person that they may be processing information regarding, or a situation or a scenario, whatever. All right. In which stage is a child more likely to exhibit attraction to the opposite sex parent? All right. If you said phallic, you are absolutely right. So let's talk about the other ones and why they're wrong. So my response to this is going to be kind of inappropriate, but this is going to help you remember. Okay. So the genital stage, G, remember, grapes, grapefruit, their balls. What do we as adults do? We play with them. Now, you might not, but we all know what they do. So think adults, think 12 and up. Do you smell what the rock is cooking? All the whole shebang. That's what we was doing at 12 and up. So think grapefruit, think grapes, two grapefruits, think genital, think 12 and up. We play with those things. Anal, we know that those are your toddlers. So when we think about toddlers, they are running around playing with diapers and all the things to begin with, right? They are doing the things. Diapers, pooping in the corner, playing with their tail, right? Latency stage, remember, is going to be, or latent stage, is going to be puberty, right? This is where your children are becoming more aware of who they are sexually, sexual identity. I did say LGBTQLL latency. Maybe I didn't say that, but that's a way to remember it. Sorry, y'all. So that's it for this episode. There are other ways in which you may see questions come up about psychoanalysis or the psychoanalytic theory or Freud himself, but you'll mostly see questions similar to the ones that we talked about today in this video. But you're going to want to keep up with, what do these things mean? What do they look like? How do I help a client with them? And what does that sound like? So hopefully this video was helpful. Sorry for the little inappropriate comments, but I feel like they were necessary to help you remember some of the information that's presented in this video. So we'll pause on that. That's it for another episode of Post Grad with Asha, NCE edition. And this video, again, was over Freud himself, the most controversial psychologist or the father of psychology there has ever been. All right, thank you guys for watching. And in the next video, again, I can't remember who I'm going to do a video on, but wait for it. It's coming. Bye, y'all.